All right, welcome to day 2 of the very first African Academic Diaspora Homecoming. To all our attending dignitaries, our conference attendees, again, welcome, all protocols observed. We want to thank you for joining us today. The Association of African Universities, in partnership with the African Union and the government of Ghana, welcomes you to the very first African Academic Diaspora Homecoming that started yesterday and is running through tomorrow, Wednesday, September 30th. My name is Resta Abraham, a very, very proud daughter of Africa via Kenya, and I am both honored and humbled to be your MC for this session, Women of African Defense in Higher Education, Opportunities and Challenges. For those joining us for the first time today, the overall objective of this wonderful homecoming is to strengthen collaboration and partnership among research and education institutions of higher learning in Africa and the diaspora to advance quality of education for all persons of African descent. This event brings together great minds from academia, policymakers, research, regional diplomatic missions, and students from Africa and the diaspora. Specifically, this session today that we are all attending, the Women of Africa, African Descent in Higher Education, Opportunities and Challenges, seeks to highlight gender inequality in academia and also look into how higher education institutions, both in Africa and in the diaspora, can create great opportunities for women in higher education. One of the great diaspora women, former First Lady Michelle Obama, once said, when girls are educated, their countries become stronger and more prosperous. When girls are educated, their countries become stronger and more prosperous. We also know that higher education as a central site for facilitating skill, knowledge, and expertise are essential to economic and social development in low-income countries. This is documented by UNESCO, it is documented by the World Bank, and it's been documented by other multilateral bodies. In spite of all this, unfortunately, higher institutions in Africa and the diaspora continue to be male-dominated, and women, especially those from socially and economically disadvantaged backgrounds, are underrepresented at the highest decision-making level. Why do we continue to have this gap? Are we not doing enough? That is a question we should all ask ourselves. Why do we continue to have these gaps? Are we not doing enough? We will continue to have that discussion today. And with that said, I want again to take the time to thank you for being here today. Your presence here is a true testament in your investment in Women of African Descent. It's also a testament that you are invested specifically in women in higher education, what opportunities are available, and what challenges women encounter each and every day. So without further ado, I will bring you our moderator for the day. And as I do that, please remember, as we continue the conversation, post your questions in our chat. We will be monitoring the chat to make sure that we pull your questions. And then we will go into our question and answer session, and we will try to address as many questions as possible. Our moderator today is none other than Dr. Amina Mama. She's also a great daughter of Africa from Nigeria, currently a professor at the University of California, Davis. She is a transdisciplinary scholar and editor of the Feminist Africa Open Access. Please join me to welcome Dr. Amina Mama. Thank you. We may be having some technical difficulties with Dr. Amina. I will go ahead and bring you our keynote speaker for today. I am so excited and can't wait to hear from our speaker for today. Our speaker is Dr. Dove. She is a proud mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She has lived in Ghana. She has lived in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Canada, the US, and the UK. I am ashamed because I'm a daughter of Africa and I've not lived in that many countries in Africa. She has graduated with a PhD from the US with a focus on African culture, women, and education. She just completed a book on Afrocentric curriculum and is writing a book with Dr. Molefi Kete Asante titled Culture and Race, The Search for Humanity. Dr. Dove is currently teaching at Temple University in the Department of Africology. I cannot wait to hear her speak today. Please join me to welcome Professor Dove. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your wonderful introduction, and I hope I can live up to your expectations. So thank you. Yes, I'm teaching. Also, thank you everybody for coming. For providing an audience. You could all have decided, no, I'm going to see Dr. Cornell West, but, for the first part when I'm speaking. But anyway, as a professor in Africology, it is actually a discipline, and it is grounded in Afrocentric theory. And as you know, Dr. Asante has developed that theory, and theories are always developing. They don't just sit there. You apply them to reality to see if they work. So it's an ever-growing theory, and it's really grounded in the history and her story of African women, men, and children, and the cries of the ancestors over the centuries. And not only is it fitting for trying to understand the conditions that people of African descent exist in the US, it's actually much broader than that, because it looks, the theory looks at Africa prior to conquest and attempts to define ways of thinking, behaving, acting, living, values and beliefs of people, of African people, prior to the different conquests over the centuries. And what it attempts to do for our students is to enable them to understand that before enslavement, something existed that was powerful and incredible, and to try to make that cultural link with the legacy and heritage of Africa. And because inside most European countries, and particularly the US and the UK and so on, there's no information about who African people are, and the cultural link between Africa and people who have been enslaved and live in these different places. So you can go to school and actually there's no information and you learn nothing about Africa. And to some extent, inside Africa itself, you can go to university and not learn anything about Africa, particularly if the major disciplines are the ones that are valued in the Western world. So I'm in the School of Liberal Arts, and liberal arts the 7 liberal arts came out of Africa, out of ancient Africa, and yet every one of these disciplines ignores that African legacy. And in fact, Africa's not mentioned in most of those disciplines. Black people are not included in most of those disciplines. So Africology is sort of an umbrella, if you like. So students coming out of psychology, sociology, anthropology, and so on, can come to our department and begin to engage in truth about who they actually are, and then go back to their disciplines and are enabled to critique them and themselves become academics that will include that story in there. I come from a Jopian perspective, and Sheikh Anta Diop, as you know, was a Senegalese multi-genius. And one of his, he was an anthropologist, sociologist, archaeologist, Egyptologist, a scientist. But one of the major contributions to the African world is his book, The African Origin of Civilization, which goes back in time to recognize, that humanity came out of Africa and that Homo sapiens sapiens are 250 to 300,000 years old. And the migrations out of Africa of Homo sapiens sapiens, who we are, began about 70,000 years ago. So there's a lot of history, 70,000 years ago. So there is a lot of history of Africa that has been ignored and not recognized. And one of the things that Diop does is he takes a look at different cultures. And from the anthropological position, it focuses on culture, but it actually uses culture in a racist way, a racist analysis of people in a hierarchy, in a human hierarchy that has been designed to discriminate against people based on the melanin content of the skin. So if you go to the discipline of anthropology, it's built upon a lot of racist understanding of women and men from Africa, who are at the bottom of this hierarchy, of this human hierarchy, which has been designed and developed. It's not common to everybody. So we look at culture from a Diopian perspective, which looks at cultural distinctions as a way of actually discerning differences, major differences among people. Now, we're used to thinking that these differences are genetic and that we are all these races, but there is just one human race. And so these cultural developments that develop the ways that people think and act, behave, develop their institutions and so on, there are 2 distinct types. One is the male, is built upon female and male equality. That is the foundation of African culture and those that maintain that. And then he looks at the domination of the woman as being part of being a patriarchal culture that we can define and we can see in amongst people within European culture, Arabic culture, Indo-Aryan culture. We can see in the texts of the Brahmanism from India, the Hebraic and the Islamic and the Christian texts, where the woman is seen to be the bringer of negativity. that these patriarchal systems use different holy texts to believe, to dominate our minds, so that we believe right from the start in the holiest works that the woman is inferior. But out of this, and also when I'm saying European culture and African culture, also remembering we're all from Africa, but changes occurred. And some of us forgot our ancestors and had different experiences. Phenotypes changed also. But I'm also looking at how the creation of the hierarchy of humanity, and therefore race, and therefore white supremacy and black inferiority, that all this came out of patriarchy. This came from the first injustice, the first domination, the first inequality of the domination of the woman by the man. And out of that injustice came the belief in the hierarchy of humanity and then race. So we've been divided up into all these racial groups. And as part of that, and what Diop is suggesting, and I'm working on with my research, because you don't just leave theories there. You see, do they work? Can you actually find this out? Will it sustain? So with Diop, I've been working on this connection between patriarchy and domination and aggression and inequality and inferiority and xenophobia and those type of things that come out of the domination of women. That over time, the women and the men have dominated other people. They have found reasons, just as at the beginning there was a reason to dominate the woman. She is not inferior. But together, over time, there's been the notion that that comes out of that relationship, because in order to keep it intact, you actually have to be prepared to be aggressive, to be a liar, to even say that women are inferior, to to maintain that that unjust relationship. And that is the center, the beginning of the family. So the families from these relationships actually imbue that hierarchy, and that comes out in the nations and societies that are constructed from that, because that is the finest point at which you will produce society, produce culture, and life. So it's very important. So over time, that type of the feelings that one gets out of being superior and having somebody do everything for you, then that has become part of a sort of theoretical way of looking at humanity. And African people have been racialized as a result of the goodness, actually, and also that goodness in male-female reciprocity that came out of Africa, the original culture that people left with. That male-female reciprocity has built massive, incredible civilizations, but it is the foundation of justice, male-female, female-male equality, and balance is the foundation of justice and harmony and democracy and so on. You can only get those things when those people are right, when you have that balance there. It's not possible really to get that when you have one human dominating another. So that spreads into this racial domination thing that we look at. And we needed to look at that because the situation in the US and in Europe generally is that black people are not just known as black people, and are made to feel, are debased and demonized and made to feel as if it's a deserving thing to have that kind of status. And so essentially the schooling, so-called education of women and men across the world is grounded in a Eurocentric and Arabocentric theoretical episteme, let's say the episteme, the knowledge, the gathering of knowledge. And Afrocentricity is really about humanity, and it's about an episteme that challenges all these other epistemes. So the focus is on humanity, on justice, on truth, on women, on men. And it's completely debased, really. I mean, most people try to tell you, oh, that's rubbish, you know, African what? Afrocent, whatever. Culture, please. You know, so we're all conditioned through the academy to deny an African heritage or legacy or relationship, even though we're African. So it's got to be taken into account, because our responsibility, and certainly mine when I'm going as a professor and I'm teaching the young minds of young women and men, I want those young women whose origins, whose ancestors, whose families lost them in Africa, who are connected to Africa, to recognize their cultural beliefs, the beauty of who they are, not only just to look at, but in the spirit. And I want them to know about female-male reciprocity as something that has existed, and incredible things and thoughts and ways of being have come out of that relationship. Because what I see happening is that the men, because we're living in a patriarchal world, but particularly in the US, I see that the women, the young women, are seeing the men through the eyes of patriarchy, and neither the girls nor the boys know their history of that unity. So instead of striving for unity, there's kind of a negative atmosphere to look at the men as though, well, they're patriarchs, but they're black men. So actually they can't truly be patriarchs, because what the system does, because it's Eurocentric, it imposes Eurocentric beliefs and values upon us. So we live out lives that are copying the people who are dominating us without, so subtly, without even knowing. And the reason that we don't know is we've got nothing to challenge that. We don't know enough about Africa. You know, since conquest, all these conquests have all been patriarchal that have happened in Africa. So, you know, that is given people this mindset. You know, so instead of looking at the probability and possibility and potential of African identity to bring us together in cultural unity, which is what Dr. Diop wanted to do. That was his dream, and that's why he theorized these cultural distinctions, to show that this was not something genetic. This is something that has to do with culture and the way that culture manifests. So in some sense you could say, well, you can't see it, but everything we build, our behaviors, how we act towards each other, what we do in life, that is the evidence of what culture is. So the idea that, oh, well, you can't have an African culture, there are thousands of languages, thousands of differences, everybody's this, everybody's that, that's just a ploy to maintain divisions among us all. So we've got racial divisions where one set of people is supposed to be in this place, we have these expectations, so it goes up to the brown, the red, the yellow, the white, and we all have expectations grounded in race theory. And race is actually a construction, it is a cultural construction. If we begin to look into that dimension, then we can understand it quite differently, because it's not a genetic thing. That means that you can never get out of this. And we can also understand why some people do the things they do, which you would expect in race. We'll all stand together in this one color and we'll all do this thing. But it doesn't happen that way, because culture impacts on our minds, and our minds are the guide us to do things. So if we're growing up in European culture and we're African and it denies the humanity of African culture, well, we're expecting a culture to liberate our minds when it can't. It's not our culture. There are values and beliefs. Everybody has a culture that loves their humanity. That's how they can exist. But if you live in a culture that despises and demonizes your humanity, it's definitely not your culture. And I'll just finish with the idea that, but you can't have all these different peoples and different cultures and put them under one umbrella. Yes, you can. See, if you even look at the history of Africa, you'll see that all the people that conquered Africa, the different groups, they're all culturally of the same minds, and they all knew that there was a cultural similitude across the whole of Africa. Now, the differences now are through the conquest. So even looking at a map of Africa, you can see all the different languages we're all speaking. You know, they're all the conquerors' languages. I know we have African languages too, but the dominant languages, and they're all part of keeping us separate. Sometimes, you know, we have different squabbles over, well, I'm speaking this language and it's better than your language, but all of them are the oppressor's language. So it really makes no sense when we're struggling over that. You know, we're trying to get language into our department. Some of the ancient writings and languages, so that we can investigate these thoughts and narratives through a African cultural perspective. So this umbrella gives us the scope to see ourselves as a unified people and to work together to see who we really are. But with the cultural imposition of the conquerors on our minds, we often miss out on that, you know. So as Dr. Asante said, there aren't, you know, African universities. There are universities in Africa who begin with ancient Greece. And that's it. Africa before that actually informed Greece, was the educator of the world. That's completely missing from the academic world that we're living in currently, and people who try to understand that are made to appear as mad people. So I'm just saying that if we have a picture, if we understand some of the incredible things that were achieved by female-male reciprocity, then we would look to a unity bringing women and men together rather than saying, well, you're a man, so you're genetically this, you're a woman, you're genetically that. We have to see ourselves, I hope we don't have to, we'll do whatever we're going to do, but in my vision, it will be about working together to formulate ways that we can come together and rebuild and reconstruct African values and beliefs that are more humanizing, that will give us the scope to seek a better future from the one that we're on at the moment. So I hope that makes sense to you, because I'm quite nervous, but I finished, and I thank you for listening, if you have listened. If you haven't listened, well, so be it, but thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Dr. Dove. We were definitely listening, and that is a lot of information, profound information. I think as not only women of African descent, but our male counterparts, it's a message that we all need to take to heart, understanding who we are, where we've come from, and then we'll be able to really understand where we are going, or what the younger women coming behind us, what they should become. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for that. We are going into our discussion session, and I just wanna check Dr. Amina, if she was having a little bit of difficulty checking if we have her online. Then we'll go into our question and answer session. But as we do that, while I'm confirming on Dr. Amina, so let's see what questions we have. I was looking at the chat. I didn't see any questions. Do we have any question for Dr. Dove? Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question for Dr. Dove as we go into our question and answer session discussion forum. So I will kick it off with a question for Dr. Dove. You mentioned in your discussion, you mentioned that we as women, we look at everything from that patriarchal lens. So what can we do that we change our mindset, and while we appreciate the male in our life, but we also want to be able to be supportive of who we are as women, be empowered, and still maintaining that respect of the male in our lives. So what can we do today to make sure that we don't look at every single thing from that lens?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that question. It's a process, and I think it's an educational process that we must embark on as people of African descent. You know, there are so many divisions, but when we look at you know, to be an African, it has a great heritage. We have to learn the story. And what the continent has in deep structure is that male, female, female, male reciprocity, the balance between the search for harmony, the search for balance, the search for truth. All these things are already in Africa. And of course, we are divided by these different cultural constraints upon our minds. But, you know, a basic thing is to look at the cultural differences. Because there is a model, one can find out this, that how these cultures work, one with female-male reciprocity, which is African, which is ensconced in Africa, and the other of male domination over the female. And we need to look at those models so that we can decide, you know, what are the things that we want to, how can we erase, how can we deconstruct, and how can we build, you know, because African institutions have been working for thousands of years, family, healthcare, politics. You know, what we're doing now is we're using the political structures and institutions of other people, of patriarchal people, and viewing ourselves through these institutions. We're actually using the same institutions, and you can look all over you know, the worlds to see that these institutions never work for women. They never work for people of African descent. They never work for black people because they're all racist and they're all patriarchal. The thing is that race and patriarchy, you can't have one without the other. You know, so it's an educational thing. If we use the different models to see at least these distinctions, that will give us an idea of what we can build on and what we need to deconstruct, because it is a process. It can't just happen because we know something. It's family after family, children. It's all about, you know, you know, the family, I forget the name, but, you know, it goes on in the family. It's taken intergenerational. You know, it doesn't happen in 5 minutes, but it can happen in schools. It can happen in families immediately. You know, that schools are learning the things pertaining to Africa are important for Africa, so that we're not learning rubbish about other people's things. We don't need to know about them. We need to know about us. You know, and children need to, right from before they're born. But that can be done in a very, you know, that can easily be done.
Thank you so much for that. We do have another question from the group for you, Dr. Dove. The question is, have you had students who found it hard to believe that Africa is the founder of all humankind?
Absolutely.
And I would answer that question and say, what do you do in those situations, and what can we do if we came across such situations that we can better educate?
Yes, well, I'm very blessed because I told you I'm teaching in the Department of Africology, and it is a safe space for us to discuss things like this every day. And so with the students who take Africology, some of them are doing courses where they're required, you know, go do Africology. But then there are some who are interested. And I would say that many of the students do not know anything like that. But I take them through a process. I don't, you know, dump them with information. I just take them slowly through a process so that they themselves can use their own experiences. Like, I went to school and knew nothing about Africa. I went to school and I hated being African. I never thought I was African. I've always thought that I'm not African. I'm ashamed of being African. African people sold us into enslavement, you know, all these kinds of things, because that's what we're taught in America. That's or Europe, you know, where the patriarchal thing is going on. So, you know, there's a model for black women to behave certain ways and be treated certain ways. There's a model for black men. It's all been planned out. You can see it there. You can read about it. You know, you can look at the policies for people. But the students come in the main with no knowledge of Africa, even students from the continent. But by the end of the course, they're writing beautifully, thinking well, and some of them go into the department, and others critique their own departments.
Wow, thank you so much. I believe we have a question from Adisa Alkebulan. I am so sorry if I butchered your last name. Adisa.
Oh, Dr. Alkebulan, yeah.
Yes, no worries. Thank you. It's so good to see you, Dr. Dove, and I really enjoyed your presentation. So I'll just get to my question, as much as I would like to, just kind of engage you, because it's been many years since
It has indeed.
It has. But I wanted to ask that for men who embrace Afrocentricity and recognize our duality, complementarity, gender balance, etc., respect the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and also who recognize the destructiveness of European patriarchy, white supremacy, how would you advise Afrocentric male scholars who engage Black feminists who are grounded in white feminism? And I ask that question just as a kind of strategy for men who want to avoid, destructive gender wars, when oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes Black feminists are kind of grounded in white feminism.
Well, that's a very difficult thing. But men who are already working in that arena or thinking in that arena and knowing the balance and knowing or learning how they must treat women, I wouldn't really understand why they're going into theories that undermine the potential of female-male reciprocity. But if they are going in that direction, I think that there's much that they can learn, because it is part of a process itself. Black feminism has arisen to challenge white feminism, to say, what about us? You're talking about women, but what about us? So it's had a very powerful theoretical position to challenge, because you see, if you look at the racial hierarchy, and it isn't only in Europe, but if you look at the European racial hierarchy of white supremacy, it is a patriarchal hierarchy in that men are always superior to women, but white women in white supremacy are privileged to be superior to all other men and women. So, there's a power there that it supports white supremacy as a theory, but, Black feminism has come up to challenge that, even though it's using the same logic and the same theoretical position. So, it's difficult for me to advise. I think the men and women who are trying to deconstruct need to work together in this effort all over the African world. Sorry to take up so long. Sorry about that. And that's probably not very clear, but that's what I think.
No, that was definitely great. I do want to bring into the conversation Dr. Beatrice Njenga. She was with us yesterday, and I also believe Martha Mohezi from FAWE is also on the call, also spoke yesterday. I want to bring them back into our conversation.
المربيات الإفريقيات أرحب بها.
Technical team, please help us with the translator.